my name is Dave Bartholomew, and Rachel and I are just going to give you a little bit about each other. I am the mayor of Circle Pines. I've been mayor for 18 years, was on the city council for a 4-year term before that. 22 years. A little odd for a guy who believed in term limits when I started, but at any rate, I really enjoy it. I also work for the state of Minnesota, just on the verge of retiring, from the Office of Collaboration and Dispute Resolution, which helps cities, counties, school boards, and townships resolve difficult situations. So we've been in the middle of kind of a lot of this, working with cities and counties and townships and school boards and just loving it. And so that's a little bit about me. And now my colleague.
Okay. Hi. Thanks, Dave. I'm Rachel Logan. I'm an equity and inclusion consultant here at Sourcewell, primarily working with schools, and I am also a current school board member for Battle Lake Public Schools. And I just want to thank those of you that have found that Q&A session and are adding some ideas in the chat. So some things about recruiting I'm seeing coming up, changing times in public service, some other kind of personal questions that folks are having. So thank you for getting in and using that function right away. And a lot of these topics that we're seeing, we have planned for, and we will be hitting on today. So
that's right, Rachel. That's right. That's exactly right. So great. So we're going to get started. We're going to break this into 3 sessions. We also want to remind you that this is the 3rd of Bridging Divides. We actually did Bridging Divides 2.0, and this is 3.0. So we'll have a link later in the session on how to find all those on our YouTube channel. We've covered things in depth like bridging divides between people that are kind of in conflict with each other. We talked about public engagement, the nasty, tough stuff, some of those kind of pieces. So we've covered a lot of topics in the past, but we want to make sure we get rolling today. So what we're going to do is first we want to talk about recruiting for local government. And I want to start this off by giving you a quick poll. And the question is, you should be able to see it coming up. Would you recommend that a friend run for public office in these times? So you have a poll there. So the question is, would you recommend that a friend run? To be a city council member, to be a school board member, a township board member. So please check that box if you can, and let us know what you think about that, and we'll check back in with you in just a minute on that. Sometimes what we worry about almost more than anything sometimes is this question of, how challenging the times are right now, right? I mean, this is one of my number one worries. As a person who's been involved in state and local government for 20 some years now, my concern is that good people won't sign up to run, or that good people might quit. You may have seen this article in the Star Tribune that said more Minnesota school board members resign in a turbulent year. Record numbers have resigned. Stillwater had another thing, and for the city of Stillwater, their school board, another member resigned. So we're seeing a lot of this. And so what it starts to do is it starts to make us think, how do we make sure that good people keep running for elective office? And then how do we make sure that good staff people come and work for our cities, counties, school boards, and townships? I'm looking at the poll here. I'm going to kind of end that poll and show, if you got any last votes, jump on in, and then I'm going to bring it over and show you the results. The results are kind of encouraging, actually, when I look at these, and that is that about 24 people out of the voters said yes, and only about a handful, 6 or 8, said that they wouldn't recommend a friend. And so more people are still hanging in there, and that's really important. So what we're going to talk about today is this idea of recruiting and retaining some of these public service folks so we don't lose them all. And I want to point out we have a mixed audience with us today. Some of you are elected officials, some of you are administrators or staffers, HR directors. And so we're going to talk to both, like recruiting for elected officials, and also we're going to talk about recruiting for staff. And so one of the things that's happening in Minnesota is there's some changing demographics. As you know, this 2020 census just came out, and all Minnesota cities and counties and school districts, all of them became more diverse in the past decade, okay? And it's gotten to now where 36% of school-aged children in the state of Minnesota are people of color. So what this means for us is that our population is changing in a lot of ways. It may be getting older in some parts of the state, things like that. What we want to do is try to think, what does this mean for us as far as cities, counties, school boards, and townships? What does it mean for the people we hire? What does it mean for the people that run for office? How can we make sure that these changes that are happening are reflected in our workforce, in the public sector, and in the people that are in those decision-making, elected official kind of positions? That's very, very important, because these changes are going to continue, and we want to make sure we're looking for opportunities. So the question is then, who would be a good leader or a staffer for your community, for your school board? And I want to start talking about this and bring Rachel in a little bit. You know, one of the things is that at the city level, for example, we tend to look at who are people on maybe a planning commission or on a park board that may be doing a great job. Now they're getting ready to move up, right? So there's those kind of possibilities. The other thing is that this new diverse Minnesota brings in a whole new group of people that could be possible staff, possible candidates. And so how do we identify them, and how do we find them? Boards, commissions, booster groups. I don't know how, in a school board, I suppose you've got like PTAs and other task forces and advisory groups where people kind of get their feet wet, and maybe they decide to run.
Yeah, I think a lot of it too is just identifying some of those pathways that people might not even be aware of. How do I even become an elected official? How do I run for a position? So along this idea of recruitment, it's information building too.
Yep. No, I think that's a good point. Thank you for that. You know, one of the other pieces is that I think that a lot of people, when they look at particularly running for office, they're very nervous about, like, what does this all include? I mean, this is too much for me. It's too big. I don't know what it all entails. And so one of the things I always think about is kind of almost putting together a draft one-pager. What is this job? You know, if it was a job like at a company, you'd have a job description. So what does that mean? And how can you calm people's concerns to tell them, you know, this isn't too big. It's not too hard. I had a friend of mine who became a city council member, and, you know, I had no thoughts that she'd be interested. And all of a sudden, a friend of mine said, you know, have you ever thought about Deb for a city council member? Well, I knew Deb from our kids played some softball and baseball together. You know, she was the team mom. She was real involved in the church, in her Catholic church in the community. And I'd never really thought about that. And they said, you should go to breakfast with her and talk to her. So I went to breakfast with her, and I sat down and I said, you know, have you ever thought of that? And she was sort of like stunned. No, me? I'd never thought I could do that or whatever. And I said, yeah, you'd be great. And here's why. You know so many people. You're a good, solid, kind of moderate sort of person. And I think you'd really add a lot to it. And so all of a sudden, she decided to run. She ran and she won, and she did a great job on the city council. I don't know, how did you end up being on a school board?
Yeah. I had a neighbor of mine, similar to your story, approach me and just say, you know, you have a school background, you're an educator, have you ever thought about possibly running for the school board? And I thought, oh, no, but maybe tell me more about that. So that was a good in to have somebody kind of seek me out and ask.
And it turns out you're doing a great job. And of course, people say, well, she must have been thinking about it forever. But the truth is, you weren't. It wasn't on
It was not on my radar immediately. No.
Exactly. And the same for me. I mean, I went to a city council meeting where it kind of started to, as we say from North Dakota, where I'm from, started to rock and roll a bit. And I looked at this city council. I thought, boy, they need a little more stability. They need maybe some different direction. And so then I ran and I won. And so I think that a lot of people in your communities would do great jobs at some of these positions, but they never think about it. Somebody's got to broach that topic with them. Somebody's got to say, you know, I think you could be a great member of a school board or a city council. And a little bit of encouragement, and boom, they're off and running. And so that's really a big part of what we're talking about, is to consider recruiting. And now when I say this, I appreciate that in some places what I'm going to talk about is seen as kind of inappropriate maybe. In Circle Pines, where I'm the mayor, I'm always looking for, if a council member isn't going to run again, who would be good to kind of have on the ballot and take their place. You know, I don't go out and try to find friends so that they'll support me in my views and positions. I just look for people that are anywhere from what I call kind of moderate left to moderate right, and leave out kind of the wings a little bit, maybe personally, and just try to encourage people. Try to say, you could do this. You'd be great at this. And it's amazing how that happens. Now, sometimes I think it's maybe not viewed as appropriate for folks to be out recruiting. But the truth is, think about when you're looking to hire a staffer at your school district or a leader for your city or county or something. I mean, you want to have good people apply. And so the question is, what's your image like out in the community? That's really important. And, remember, when people come looking for a job, for example, at your school district, when you're looking to hire teachers or maybe as a superintendent or principals, you want to get as big a pool as possible so that you have something to pick from.
Right.
And the truth is, when you put out that advertisement saying, hey, we're looking for a new principal or something, they're going to go to that school district site and they're going to Google it, and they're going to take a look at all kinds of things. They're going to look for any stories about the school district. They're going to look at trying to figure out what the budget maybe looks like, how financially solid it is. They might look. We talked earlier about changing demographics. They might look to see what are the other principals like. Who's on the school board? Do I see people that look kind of like me in that picture?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, how you're visually represented on a website or what's written about you gives that idea of who's there, who's not there, could I fit in, is there a need for somebody like me, is there a gap? All of those pieces get communicated through things like what your public image is or what you're putting out there.
Well, exactly right. And in our past conversations for Bridging Divides 2, and we'll do a little bit of it today, we've talked about this diversity, equity, inclusion piece. Sometimes you want to have a broader, deeper pool of people because you do want to make sure the school or the city, county, whatever is seen as a welcoming place for folks. Right. And you've got folks in your community, and now are they represented in these positions? Because a lot of times those elected positions kind of lag a bit, right? And we're moving beyond kind of having all these folks all look similar. We're looking to try to get a good representation of the whole community. So I think the same thing happens for staff. So elected officials or staff, either way, you're always thinking, how does our community, how does our school district look online? What kind of recommendations would people say? These folks that are principals, they know what's a good school district. And so they want to go to some of these communities and school districts. Other ones may be struggling a little more. And then you have to watch your image a little bit. So another piece of the puzzle is a quick review of our Bridging Divides 2.0. And these are some of the factors, and I'll have Rachel give me some thoughts on this, but this is sort of a variety of identities that we all have. We all carry a bunch of identities, and people look at us and they think this, and these are some of the kind of different sort of elements that go into this.
Right. So just, again, this isn't an exhaustive list. We could add more to it, but just to kind of fill out this idea of whom do you have representing your community or your school? And do we have wide representation? Obviously, you can't have somebody represent every single piece, but we talked a little bit about thinking about whose voice is there, which identity is represented, and which is not. And if we move to the next slide.
Sure, Ken.
Some of the questions that came out of that 2.0 session was this idea of, okay, well, how do we get them? Or where do we find them, these diverse voices? And I'm using diverse as in we're all diverse, right? Like, I have a race, I have a gender. If you are, connected to kind of the dominant representation, it might be able to see diversity as something else that everybody else has, and I don't have diversity. So I just want to be clear. We all have diverse identities, and we're going to talk about that in our next section deeper. But kind of I have a few quick strategies, but this whole idea of how do we get these voices that might not be at the table. And I want to just kind of give you a little spoiler alert. There are not 5 quick strategies that I can give you to build an inclusive team. So I will give you a couple things that are within reach here. And so if we move one more slide. Thanks. A few ideas that Dave's already touched on too, thinking about identifying who are your local experts, how do I engage and listen and believe the experiences of those folks, If we can't identify people right in our community who are some of the national or global thought leaders around certain topics that we can be tuning into. And then this whole idea of grow your own, which connects to this idea of recruiting and campaigning. And I just want to add to the idea, just thinking about the purpose of recruiting. If we are recruiting with the purpose of identifying gaps and trying to fill spaces at the table that we know are voices that we don't have, then we're recruiting to expand accessibility. If we're recruiting, like Dave said, like I'm looking for my friends or I'm looking for people that are like-minded to myself, then our recruitment efforts are going to actually limit accessibility. So that is definitely not what we're talking about when we're talking about recruitment, but thinking about how do we inform people about the process, the voting process as well. How do we get people to come out and vote for candidates that are diverse, make sure they have accessibility to voting places. And so those are just a few kind of quick ideas, but in part 2, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of that mind shift work that's a little bit harder than what we maybe want as a quick fix.
Right. And before we get into retaining, I'm going to take a look, Rachel, at some of our questions over here.
Oh, thank you.
Here's the question. What if we or others don't know what our image is to the community? Or even if there is one, right? I mean, so, sometimes the challenge is you work for an organization or you're in a leadership role, you think you have a great image. And the truth is that maybe people don't, maybe you're not really so sure what your image is. I mean, I know in Circle Pines sometimes and in some communities, they'll actually do a survey. It can be kind of a Survey Monkey, kind of a quick free thing, or you can do, pay people to come in and do a little deeper dive, because you do want to have a sense of it. I think the worst thing for people in leadership would be to think you're doing well, but out on the street, you're not doing so well.
Sure. And I always think of the idea that perception is reality. Right. So even if we want to say, well, no, because I'm doing X, Y, Z, if the perception is this, we need to respond and react to the perception. So I know in Battle Lake in our school district, we recently went through, MSBA led us through a strategic planning session, which brings in listening sessions from the community, from teaching staff, students, leadership, school board. So it's kind of tackling all those different stakeholder groups and giving folks an opportunity to share their honest opinions about how things are going. So that gives an interesting perspective too about what the perception is based on different groups. So there might be one perception internally from the school and a different perception externally. And so then, you're thinking about how do we justify it and rectify some of those differences in the information we're getting from those listening sessions.
Good point. Another question here was, I've been asked to run for the school board, but doesn't feel appropriate since I don't have children. Can community members without children be beneficial members of the board? That's, that, like in a city council, you kind of have to live in the city in order to be on the city council. So that's our criteria. Sure. But what about non-parents or people maybe whose kids have already left the school district?
Sure. Well, my first gut reaction is diverse perspectives are diverse perspectives, and those are going to be valuable. Sometimes when you're living in the situation and it's all it can be hard to see outside of it. So actually, if you're a community member that still is in tune to the happenings of the school, or we go back to that, maybe you have insider information on that school perspective, you can still bring a valuable lens to the conversation, regardless of which of those identities that you you claim. So I would say all information is good.
I agree, and I can't remember what the percentage is, if you may know it statewide, but the number of households that don't in a community that do not have kids in the school district. I mean, it's pretty big. It's a third, 30-40% or whatever, maybe some places even larger. And those people are all voters. They're all taxpayers. They would all be voting on operational levies if the school needed more money. So getting that voice into the room of people that don't have children in the school district could really be valuable. I mean, that could help you to understand maybe a little more about your community.
Right. Before I considered running, I had asked our current school board member, do you have somebody like me already? Because if you do, then I don't feel like you need another person like me in this position. and here's who I am, here's what I'm about, here are my stats. But if you feel like that's kind of a gap, we don't actually have that voice or perspective, then yes, then I would like to consider running. So even, you might even consider asking, if you have 5 members and none of them have children, then maybe we have that perspective already. But if that's not represented, then you may be a good fit.
Yeah. A couple other questions I see as we roll along. How do we engage our community with constructive, civil, and kind dialogue? Followed right by, I'm hoping to learn skills to tamp down divisive rhetoric. And then the next one, school board meeting conduct, those kind of things. That's kind of the ball that we're dealing with right now.
Right.
And we're going to be talking about that throughout our sessions today. But you're right. The whole idea is a lot of times people want to be heard. And this idea that people are not happy with the national government, maybe they're not so thrilled about state government, is kind of coming on down to cities and schools now. We've got these very divisive issues that all of a sudden have kind of popped up, if I could say that. And it makes it so these school board meetings can be, in particular, are much more raucous than they have been in the past. Sometimes cities are a little used to that. If you're developing a new part of town, sometimes the neighbors get all upset and come to the city council meeting, and you have that anger and groups coming in. That's not typically been what a school board's faced. And I know I have a friend on our school board in our area, which is the northern suburbs of Minneapolis, St. Paul. And she just got on the school board. She's doing a tremendous job. But boy, is it a different job than she thought when she ran a year or two ago. It is much more, kind of right there, front page headlines. A lot of people on both sides of an issue, masking, vaccines, whatever, coming in. A lot of emotion, a lot of energy. It's a little tougher time to be a school board member.
Yep. I recently, I don't have it in the resources, but I think we can still add. MSBA had an article about thinking about your protocols, and this might be a good time to tighten up some of the structures and protocols that you have. If it's been a little bit quieter in your community in the past, and all of a sudden, like you said, we're seeing this kind of burst of participation, which is good. We want people to be informed and participating in what's happening in local affairs. But it might be an opportunity to look and see, what are our protocols? What is the structure? Does the community understand the process for having your voice heard? Or are they showing up and we're already making a decision on a agenda item, and people feel like, oh, well, I came here because I have a concern about this. So even helping to educate your community on how does this work, and what are the best avenues for you to share your voice, because we want to hear your voice, but it could be confusing if you're not sure what the process is.
I think that's so true at the city level too, and school boards, counties, that we kind of know how this all flows, and we know that there's these steps and stuff, and people are just hearing about it from a neighbor or something they read in the paper, and all of a sudden they're jumping in. And they don't realize all the work that's already been done. They don't realize that maybe the decision's already been made. And we're going to talk about that in a few slides from now when we get to public engagement. So we'll go back over and get into our slideshow. We're trying to keep an eye on those questions in the Q&A. So please keep putting them in there. So that's great. So now we've got our team there. You've got good people working for you. You've got good people on your board or commission. And so the question is, how do you keep them there? Right? How do you retain them? So recruiting them, getting people in, and then making sure you don't lose people all of a sudden. And of course, that loss is a lot of experience, both at the state level and at staff level and at the elected level. These people have been there for many years. They know how things work. Yes, it's always great to have some new energy and some new perspectives. It's nice to have a blend of both. So some seasoned folks maybe, and some folks that maybe are a little new and asking a lot of questions. And I always think to myself, when I have a new council colleague join, they're asking all these questions about these budget items or this or that. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh, come on. I mean, don't bother going through the police department's check register and wondering what's this for and what's that for. They're cool, they're doing a good job, don't worry about it. And then I'll pause and I'll think to myself, hold it, Dave, that's exactly what you were like when you started. And that's a very valuable role to play, to ask those questions that are maybe right out there and folks don't know, and it's our job to share that information. So I think, the bottom line is that we've invested a lot of money in staff or elected officials and the training of them and everything else. It makes the systems all work so efficiently. And so we don't want to lose people if we can. We want to maybe even think about succession planning. You know, if we know somebody's going to be retiring in a couple of years or whatever, that's a different path than this idea of people saying, you know what, this is getting to be too disruptive. It's not what I signed up for. I want to quit. I want to leave. And I don't know, that's something that we see in stories like we talked about earlier in the school boards nowadays. But it's always a challenge. People not feeling fulfilled at a staff or an elected level and deciding it's just time to go. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. We haven't lost a lot of people, but I know that some of my council members and some of my people in my area are thinking that, you know what, maybe I just don't need this hassle.
Sure. And I think we've had that conversation before, especially if people maybe don't see themselves as political candidates,
Right.
then it might feel like kind of a shock. Like, wait, I just wanted to serve my community. Like, I care about the community, or I care about the kids, and this is more than I bargained for.
more than I signed up for. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. And yeah, because I think school boards in particular don't see themselves as political. Now, I would argue that cities and for the most part counties and stuff too don't, because you don't have that D or the R for Democrat or Republican on the ballots. But still, people are very engaged these days, and they're coming out and they want to be heard. So that's great. The other thing I think about when I think about losing people is not just the pressure of politics and everything else that's happening at this current moment we're living in, such divisive times. It's also that people may not feel fulfilled, right? They might be kind of languishing. They're not depressed. They're getting work done, but they really don't feel like they have a sense of purpose or like that they're making a difference. And that's so important to people. And it's so important to our teammates, right? Because you can go through those phases in your life where all of a sudden you've got things going on at home that are kind of taking your main attention. And all of a sudden the work is kind of slipping a little bit, or it just seems kind of the same old. You've kind of lost your buzz for the job. And I worry about that all the time, of how do you kind of keep that as a main option, making sure that people understand how you need to continue on, and you just can't languish in your roles. And I think that leaders like Rachel and I have a role in that, right? It isn't just the superintendent or the principal, or it isn't just the city or county administrator. It can also be those elected officials that have a role in retention, and supporting the team. When the school board is getting a lot of grief at a school board meeting on a particular issue or something, and all those staff that work for the school district are feeling a little bit under attack, one of the things is we're all in this together, right? There needs to be a sense of team, and then realize people, you're not alone. That this is you're part of the team. And I think sometimes you need to check in with your colleagues and ask how they're doing. I just read some articles about emotions and how all that fits into leadership. And let's face it, sometimes in Minnesota, if you're like me, a Norwegian Lutheran, you don't like any signs of public affection, for sure, and you don't really like a lot of emotion. You kind of thinking, I can just put that out of this. But the truth is, this is tough times, and we need to check in with our colleagues and say, how you doing? And what can I do to help? And so I think the other piece is trust. One of the things here in Minnesota that we're sort of lucky about is that we have a guy in our state by the name of David Horsager, and this is his latest book called Trusted Leader. His brother was a county commissioner in Wadena County. And David Horsager in Trusted Leader is a great book. I'd recommend it for anybody that wants to think about how can you promote trust within your organization. And it doesn't matter what your title is or anything else, a manager, supervisor, a line staffer, or an elected official, but promoting trust is really a very important function. So I think there's some of those things that are really coming into play here nowadays.
I'm noticing a couple questions
Okay.
coming
Good.
through here. Both of them kind of speaking to this idea of engaging people in the process. How do you get people to come and be a part of community discussions? Maybe they feel like they don't have the expertise, or maybe they don't feel like they have time available. So balancing this idea of inclusion and respect for recruiting.
Yep.
Thoughts or ideas on
Well, and
that?
we're going to be covering that in one of the other sessions, but that's
Yeah.
exactly right. I mean, folks need to be invited. this needs to be a welcoming kind of place. It's pretty intense for people to go to a city council or a school board meeting.
Right.
They've never been there before.
Yep.
They don't understand how it all works. They're probably a bit more, more than a bit intimidated.
Yep.
And so we need to make sure that they feel comfortable and know what's going to be happening. And we have a slide on that here in the next, I think it's the third section. There's 3 sections today. In that third section, so we will be talking about public engagement and how do you invite people, how do you handle the meetings when they start getting a little rough. That's coming up shortly. So something I want to have folks remember here as we wrap up this section is one of my favorite lines. Richard Branson is the head of Virgin Airlines, Virgin Records. He started all these different companies up, quite the entrepreneur. And one of his main views in life is that you take your staff, the people you work with, and you train them so well, you get them to conferences, you have them have all this personal growth. And so they grow and they meet people and they really are getting sharp at their job. And so they're very, very talented and they could leave, they could get other jobs. But then the key is that you also then treat them well enough so they stay. And I really think that's the key to a lot of this. You don't want to say, oh, if we train them, they'll leave. The point is, get the people to develop, get them to develop their skills, their talents, train them, and then also treat them well enough. So they're saying, why would I go someplace? I'm part of a team here. I really feel like I'm helping my community. This is really still challenges me, so I'm growing in my position. I think that's the kind of thing that you want to think about in the end of this session. So with that is kind of a wrap up of the first part. And what we're going to do now is take a 10-minute break. And then we're going to come back and Rachel's going to lead the next section on leading for inclusion. And so that'll be exciting. And then when we're done with that, we'll have another short break. And then both of us will come back for the third session. And so we're going to be talking some more about public engagement, lots of good things. So we hope you'll stick with us and we'll take a short break and then we'll come back. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Sounds great. Okay, see you soon.
See you soon.